Welcome here. You are welcome here regardless of your age, your race, your income, your religion, or the gender with which you identify. You are welcome here regardless of who you love, who you vote for, the regrets that burden you, or the mistakes you have made. In this safe community, we support each other in the sacred task of becoming, celebrate the transcending mystery of life, and rely on the transforming power of love. Here, we revere the words of the great teachers such as Jesus, the Buddha, and Confucius. It is, however, the task of every UU to be their own Buddha, their own Jesus, or their own Confucius. It is our work as a community to walk with each other along the pathways that lead towards happiness, compassion, and life fully lived. And while we are a safe harbor where there is solace and healing, we are also a launching pad from which we are propelled into the tumult of life to live courageously, justly, and lovingly. In this sacred place, we create the structures that lift up the downtrodden, set the captives free, and heal the brokenhearted. Here, we have learned to be fully human is to be fully divine, and that with a little help from our friends, we can each tell our own unique story.
On May 10th, 1933, 80 years ago, encouraged by the Nazi regime, members of the German Student Union burned nearly 25,000 library books. This was one of the events that began one of the darkest periods in modern history. I light our chalice in memory of those lost in the Holocaust. A few years ago, one or more BUUFers said they'd like to move BUUF to Benton Harbor. I remarked that I didn't think that was a good idea. I said that people in Benton Harbor tend, in my opinion, to be more Christian than we are, and their music is different. It's whole body, which I love. A BUUF member sent me a message stating that I'd made a racist remark. I responded telling them the following: my family was open-minded, which I feel very blessed about. Negative comments about people of color, other faiths, and sexual identities never came up. We didn't have time for that nonsense. Since I joined BUUF, this is what I told the person when I responded. Since I joined BUUF in 2004, I have worked for social justice in a variety of ways. I have volunteered at the Benton Harbor High School Library, which was delightful. I'm a member of BUUF's Social Justice Committee and the local Race Relations Council, and I invite you to join us. People of color have been guests in my home, and I in theirs. My point is, please don't make assumptions about others' opinions. And also regarding the thought about moving BUUF to Benton Harbor, when working to combat racism and other oppressions, think carefully about the best way to do so. Why a duck? In the 1970s, my mother lived in an apartment in a lily-white suburb on the North Shore of Chicago. The janitor in her building was a man of color who had attended college, maybe graduated. I don't remember. Still, he was a janitor. Mother and I became friends with Alan and his wife, Pearl. Alan gave Mother two beautiful antique lamps. One is now in my living room, the other in my bedroom. Alan refinished a couple of things for Mother, so I asked him if he'd refinish an old duck decoy I had. He did so. When I went to pick it up, Alan said he decided to integrate the duck. So today, I present my symbol of equity and inclusion.
Well, good morning. My name is Barry Kitterman, and I'm new to BUUF, but I'm not new to the UU movement. I've been a UU for over 30 years. And I'm a retired professor of English and creative writing. As someone who loves books and believes in the value of reading books, I think books can change our lives, change our ways of thinking. This morning's focus, the banning of books and censorship, is dear to my heart. But I would venture a guess that that's true of almost everyone who's here today. I find it easy to say, I'm against censorship, especially when it involves the books I find merit in. Every few years, there's some noise about banning Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. And it's easy for me to say I disagree with that. I think Huckleberry Finn is one of the greatest books ever written by an American author. But this is my challenge, and perhaps it's yours too, to defend the work that I don't especially care for or care about. Years ago now, the very talented photographer Robert Mapplethorpe came out with a series of bold photos that were homoerotic and many of them masochistic in nature. His work was banned in some cities. I was living in Ohio at the time, and I went to Cincinnati to see the show, the exhibit. And at that time in Cincinnati, you had to be over 18 to go in the back of the gallery and see the questionable photos. So I went back and looked at the photos, and they were representations of gay men during the AIDS, the height of the AIDS era. Very strong stuff. And I came out of that area and I was processing what I had seen, what I had learned about that time period and my gay brothers, and also processing what art could be and what art could depict. And there was a little man standing out in the main part of the gallery. He was wearing a tweed coat and a sweater vest. And he was staring up at a photograph that Mapplethorpe had taken of a rose. Mapplethorpe took photos of all kinds of things. And it really was a glorious photo, very vibrant red. And his wife was there with him, and she was standing just off to the side. And something told me that she was regretting the fact that she had brought him to this exhibit. You read people's body language, and he was looking at this photograph of a rose, and he said to her, "Now that's art." And I couldn't help but imagine the rest of those conversations, the ones they'd had on the way to the gallery and the ones they had on the way home from the gallery. It's taken me a long time to realize that we are all that little man in the tweed coat. We all have our ideas about what makes for great art and literature, what is fitting, and what is, for lack of a better word, what is coarse. And our challenge is to defend, at least to allow a space for, writing and visual art and dance and music that isn't our cup of tea. It's easy for me to stand up for Huckleberry Finn. That doesn't cost me very much. But I believe I'm also called upon to defend the scenes, those on stage or on screen or in print, that don't sit so easily with me. Standing up for the difficult work, that's the hard part. That's the real challenge in combating censorship. Thank you.
I confess that I Googled Barry. And the first site I clicked on was a student review of his work, which is dangerous, I think. But out of about 45 or so students that had rated Barry, he was rated awesome by 39. So Barry, you must have done a pretty good job. Must have touched a few people. When I was a young engineering student in in college, we would often mock English majors by saying things like, I hope you enjoy your job at McDonald's when you graduate, that kind of thing. But it wasn't until much later in life, and I started hanging around with a few English majors, that I began to realize that they had a much broader life than I did. They had a much bigger life because they had encountered all these different ideas about what it means to be a human being when they were in college. Sometimes I wish I had graduated in English. So Barry, it's good to have you here today. I'd just like to make, before I begin, I'd like to make a small comment about the UUA. It is a human thing. There's a quote that Jesus had that I enjoy quoting. It's something about straining out gnats and swallowing camels. I think there seems to be a strain of thought or movement in that seems to be vigorously straining out gnats as a herd of camels tramp through. And the gnats they're standing out is, in my opinion, is a critical race theory, racism, and other kind of all important things, but they're gnats compared to the big issues that society faces, and in terms of the big issues that you and I, as Unitarian Universalists, I think, are called to address. And there is another much smaller, but I see it happening too, and that is to weaponize the gnats. You know what I mean? To use the gnats, to use my understanding of racism, of systematic racism, our sexism, our transgender awareness as a kind of weapon to beat people over the head who aren't as aware as I am. So at any rate, that's my complaint for the day, and I hope that's not going to offend anyone. So I have a very short sermonette. I am a free speech fundamentalist. As a fundamentalist, I am very uncomfortable with the idea that speech, designated as hate speech, has been criminalized in many democratic countries. I'm a free speech fundamentalist when it comes to hate speech for three reasons. Number one, I want to know who the haters are. I especially want to know who hates me. Reason number two, I consider hate to be a powerful drug that interferes with spiritual development and maturity. Hate is a poison to the soul and to society. When the hate is out in the open, we can deal with it in positive ways that do not waste lives. For instance, Yale Law School graduate Stuart Rhodes, founder of the Oath Keepers, was in connection to the January 6th affair at the Capitol, sentenced to 18 years in prison for seditious conspiracy. Rhodes is a very smart man. He is also deeply addicted to hate. The question is, will he ever find the spiritual maturity to realize that his addiction has brought him to rock bottom? He could have been a lawyer working for justice and serving the good. Instead, he sits in prison. What an unfortunate waste of a smart person with good leadership abilities, all because he is unable to control or even identify his addiction. There's a third reason, but I am going to wait to reveal it until after we play a 1-minute video sponsored by the NRA. Please pay attention. I am going to test you on the material. I should note that both my wife, Patty, and Joanne Krettek, our chair of worship, felt that video is too disturbing to play in a worship service, at least initially when they encountered it. So if you would play that for us, Nico.
They use their media to assassinate real news. Our freedom is to fight this violence of lies with the clenched fist of truth. I'm the National Rifle Association of America, and I'm freedom's safest place.
Okay, so now that you have viewed the video, please do an inventory of your emotional reaction to it. Please raise your hand if you were feeling angry, scared, or hateful. Okay. Yeah, that's my reaction too. That's how addictive hate is. I mean, and that's hate speech against us. I mean, think how addictive it is for those folks who are of that point of view. But if you notice the content of the speech was primarily empty rhetoric. It really didn't say who the they was, but you got the general idea that it was liberal thinking people, such as many of us are here today. The third reason I believe we should keep hate speech out in the open is when we personally feel the power of the drug, which some of us did here right now, we gain compassion and understanding for those who are addicted, including ourselves. With compassion and understanding comes the capacity to love. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." This is why I am a free speech fundamentalist. When the hate is out in the open, we have a better chance of setting ourselves free from our own addictions and of helping other haters become our friends. And thank you. And now, Joanne.
This feels a little bit like deja vu because just a few months ago, we did a 4-part sermon on Article 2, and now we're doing a 4-part sermon on this. But the Article 2 theme was democracy, and I think it ties in nicely with our theme of free thought and free expression. So as Reverend Jim said, the title of my message is Dangerous Ideas. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. This quote has been variously attributed to Voltaire and also to his biographer, Evelyn Beatrice Hall, who wrote that it summarized Voltaire's philosophy. Regardless of the origin, this quote was a favorite of my high school American history teacher, Mr. Bushinger. He was a non-conventional teacher who routinely participated in Revolutionary War reenactments and tried to teach multiple perspectives on almost all established American history and doctrine. For example, he often wondered if the bloodshed of the Revolutionary War was really necessary. What if we had waited another 100 years and peacefully declared our independence and joined the British Commonwealth like Canada did? Were American soldiers really that brave and strong, or were they just a ragtag bunch of guerrilla fighters who became too much of a nuisance to the British Empire? Was America really the hero of both world wars? Or was our success due in large part to the fact that we entered the wars late and weren't tired out from years and years of fighting? Mr. Bushinger often questioned American beliefs around liberty. For example, are Americans really free to marry whomever they want? He reminded us that, at the time anyway, you couldn't marry someone of the same sex. You also couldn't marry your sibling or a child. He used to make fun of the, quote, better dead than red, and the extremes of McCarthyism. Was it really worse to be alive than to be communist? Was destroying the lives and careers of certain Americans during the McCarthy era and denying the right to free speech really justified? I think Mr. Bushinger didn't want us to take anything for granted, including our American liberties and the accepted interpretations of American history. Now, I don't know if Mr. Bushinger is still alive today, although I hope that he is. And I have to wonder what he thinks about all the changes in America to both our liberties and how those liberties are viewed. My guess is that he would feel the need to even more boldly declare Voltaire's quote as a foundational belief underlying our Constitution and Bill of Rights. What made Voltaire/Hall's statement so memorable and important is that it stood in contrast to nearly all of world history up until that point. Human civilization was largely built upon the forced adoption of belief systems and forms of government. If you didn't believe that the king was empowered by divine right, if you didn't believe that your parents should arrange your marriage, if you didn't believe in your predefined gender role, then civilization as you knew it might literally collapse. Everyone needed to agree, needed to conform, needed to work together, or another civilization might overtake them. The idea of risking your life so your neighbor could declare that the Pope was a fraud, that all people are created equal, or that animals shouldn't suffer would seem preposterous, if not suicidal. Many philosophers, prophets, and scientists were revolutionary, and many were also murdered or otherwise silenced. Why? Because their ideas were viewed as dangerous. They were dangerous to the established power structures, including the church, the royal family, and the landowners. Throughout history, it has been the norm for the ruling class, and even most classes of society, to resist new ways of thinking about the world and our place in it. In fact, censorship continues to be practiced in most parts of the world in some form or another. Why? Because revolutionary ideas represent the worst form of threat, an existential threat to key shareholders in society. Most people would rather kill to silence an idea they find threatening than to kill for someone's right to share it. The right to free speech is a quite recent human invention or concept, but most agree that a true democracy isn't possible without this right. Because if you can't be exposed to ideas freely, then you can't make informed choices at the voting booth. If newspapers can't report about corruption, powerful entities won't be brought to account. Without the ability to share new ideas about how society or individual roles within society should be structured, progress as we know it becomes impossible. And yet, as Reverend Jim's video shows, it is very difficult to ignore what we each perceive as dangerous ideas, or in other words, perceived threats to our way of life. Conservatives feel threatened by progressive ideas shared in modern media, by BLM protest, and by CRT taught in schools, while progressives feel threatened by what they perceive as hurtful language directed at the nation's most vulnerable and potential incitements to violence. But what is our way of life if not for the freedom of speech and freedom of expression? What are we fighting for to protect if not our liberty? But wait, do we really want to fight to defend our children's right to become a religious fundamentalist or an anti-Semite? Our neighbor's right to post Trump flags all over his lawn or wear a tattoo of a Nazi flag? Our cousin's right to attend a Milo Yiannopoulos speech or an NRA rally? Our coworker's right to play violent video games, spread lies about COVID, or watch pornography? Why, yes, we do want to defend those rights. As H.L. Mencken put it, the trouble about fighting for human freedom is that you have to spend so much of your life defending sons of bitches, for oppressive laws are always aimed at them originally, and oppression must be stopped in the beginning if it is to be stopped at all. There's a reason hate speech is protected by the U.S. Constitution. There's a reason the Supreme Court ruled that Westboro Baptist Church has a right to picket a soldier's funeral with signs saying things like, "Thank God for dead soldiers." Because if you outlaw offensive language, and almost all language offends at least someone, then there will be very little left to say, very few books left to read, very few movies left to watch, and very few ideas left to share. In truth, outright censorship is fairly limited in modern America. Most of what we think of as censorship today isn't an outright ban on producing or distributing content. It's more a matter of limiting access to particular content or forms of expression. For example, local libraries or school systems refusing to carry certain books. Target removing certain Pride merchandise from its stores due to threats of violence or boycotting. Social media moderation policies that deplatform certain people, words, or images. The removal of letters to the editor in UU World. The banning of drag shows near schools or in public. Efforts by many groups, including a key lawyer at the ACLU, to prevent the publishing of Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, about the dangers of gender transitioning, or the perceived dangers. And finally, the decision to stop recording UUA board open houses, justified by the following statement. We are not currently recording the open houses because we have experienced behavior and language that was harmful. We did not want to perpetuate that harm by recording and sharing those events. Then there are the efforts to silence certain individuals or control what they say. Universities refusing to host controversial speakers. Teachers and doctors prohibited from talking about certain subjects. University professors, actors, sports stars, business leaders, and others fired for not supporting the right causes, or not using the right phrases, or not sharing the right ideas. The problem with censorship is that it places someone else's judgment above our own. Who is to say, you know better than me, which ideas are healthy and which are dangerous? If what's best for humanity were so uniform and so obvious, then there wouldn't be so many different opinions about it. The truth is that when we delegate our own responsibility to exercise good judgment, we also give up the opportunity for spiritual growth. And we do this sometimes out of fear and sometimes out of convenience. Or the reverse is true. We assume that we are somehow wiser than others and seek to silence them for the greater good. According to Alan Dershowitz, now that I see good and decent people demanding censorship and denial of due process for those who collaborated with Trump, I have a better understanding of what I grew up with. These modern-day McCarthyites of the left were genuinely afraid of Trump and what he stood for. They really believed, as did some of the McCarthyites I knew during the 1950s, that giving free speech rights to those who they feared would bring about catastrophe. For them, both then and now, the noble end of preventing the victory of communism or Trumpism justified any means, including the most ignoble and repressive. Freedom of speech should be protected not because the marketplace of ideas assures that the good will drive out the bad, but despite the reality that the bad will sometimes prevail. Hitler received the most votes in the German free election of 1932, and other terrible candidates have beaten far better candidates in free elections. But ending free elections is not the answer to bad election results. Free speech should also be permitted despite its occasional bad results, because the alternative is more dangerous. So what does this mean for us here in this room? It means we have both an opportunity and a responsibility. We have an opportunity to reaffirm the founding principles of our nation and our faith, and resist the temptation to ban or limit what we perceive as dangerous ideas. This may mean going against what's popular within our own tribe. It may mean advocating for rights that our fellow citizens might prefer to deny us. It may mean starting within our own faith, our own party, our own family, and ourselves, areas where we can make the biggest difference. For this is the path of our own spiritual development. It's dealing with our own temptation to hate and choosing to seek to understand instead. It's accepting the risks dangerous ideas bring in order to make democracy and progress possible. It's tolerating discomfort and sometimes a little risk to defend others' rights to say objectionable things. For no matter how much words can hurt, war and uprisings hurt more. Dialogue at least gives us the possibility of resolving disagreements nonviolently. We need to tolerate words and viewpoints we don't like in order to, as Reverend Jim says, see where the hate is coming from and why. But it's also so that we can learn and consider new ideas and perspectives so that we might grow and change, so that we might learn to use our own judgment and discretion rather than replacing it continuously with that of our party, our faith leaders, or our friends. Because in the final analysis, spiritual development is more about changing ourselves than trying to change those around us. And the best way to promote nonviolent political change is through dialogue. I will wrap up with a quote from Tom Hanks. Let me decide what I am offended by and what I'm not offended by. I would be against reading any book from any era that says abridged due to modern sensitivities. Thank you.
As I extinguish our chalice in this place of openness and love and inclusion, let us continue our work to protect our libraries and the right to read. And I'm reminded of Sinclair Lewis's 1935 book, It Can't Happen Here. In his book, he showed that it can happen here. So let's work so that what happened in Nazi Germany doesn't happen here.